Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. Connecticut Paid Leave is a program that gives income replacement for certain health issues. And one of the provisions is that there are 12 days of income replacement for family violence, also known as domestic violence. And you can get benefits to seek medical or psychological care, to seek care for a victim services organization, to relocate, or to participate in any civil or criminal proceeding relating to family violence. And I'm really happy it's a provision in Connecticut Paid Leave. It's not an easy topic to talk about, but I'm really happy that you are all here. And joining me today is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Meghan Scanlon. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Meghan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And also the Executive Director of the network in Enfield, Foley O'Connor.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, I'm very happy to have you here. And I'm sure your life as a former state trooper will give us a lot of insight. And survivor Jenna. Jenna, I cannot thank you enough for being here and being brave enough for being on a podcast and telling your story, because I think you may help other people who may have been in your situation. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so happy and honored to have you here.
I'm really happy to be here.
If someone listening right now needs help or just someone to talk to, I just want to get these out here. ConnecticutSafeConnect.org, or you could call or text 888-774-2900. And wherever you are in the state, it will get you the help you need. And advocates are available 24/7. Well, thank you all for being here. I wanted to throw out some statistics for you. So Super Bowl Sunday is the worst day for domestic violence in America. Why is that?
Alcohol probably plays a role. I think whenever you're looking at alcohol being involved with a particular day, the 4th of July tends to be another high incident day. But, you think about football too, and I love football, but there's an aggression that goes on with that sport. There's aggression that kind of feeds into people that may be watching it. But again, I'm just making assumptions.
Yeah.
This is purely anecdotal.
Yeah, I think there's, to Karen's point, I think there's alcohol, there's, sports betting that goes on there, within different families. And I think that plays an impact into the ultimate feelings that come out in various ways on that day.
Over a third of domestically abused Americans are serious violence survivors. That is a scary statistic.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the fact that, in my opinion, it's just as relevant as other public health issues. 1 in 4 women will be impacted in their lifetime, 1 in 7 men. That's actually more than breast cancer. That's 1 in 8 women, right, that will be impacted by breast cancer. So I think it's really important to talk about it more, to talk about it, educate people, let them know about the resources, because it is prevalent, and it has a short and a long-term impact on not just the victims and not just the abusers, but their children and all of us, really.
Yeah. Jenna, why don't you tell me a little bit about your story?
Basically, I was with my abuser for 7 years. I met him at 22 years old. I had just gotten out of a relationship where I'd been cheated on, and he was giving me all of the validation that I needed. And, oh, I love you so much. You're so beautiful. And all of those things that I was desperately seeking because I didn't have any self-worth. So I latched on to that very quickly. And it really quickly turned to manipulation tactics. And I'm realizing it now. My family would point it out to me. My friends would point it out to me. And when they would do that, I would push them away. So I lost everybody very quickly. And then within 6 months, I was pregnant with my first son. And it was a huge blessing. I was very excited, but I was already at the point where I couldn't see past what was happening. Mm-hmm. I couldn't see myself anymore. I had already lost my identity. I had lost my job. I was forced to basically be babysat by him all the time. I had to be around him 24/7. I would go to work with him. I would drive him to work, everything like that. So all of it happened very, very quickly. It was a lot of shrinking myself slowly over time. It wasn't as much physical, like physical did happen, but it wasn't the most prevalent. And I think for me, that was why I wasn't like, oh, I'm being abused. It wasn't, there are bruises, there's marks, there's hospital visits. It wasn't like that. It was mental and emotional and financial, and eventually it became sexual, and it was every kind of abuse under the sun. By the time I was done, I was doing everything in my power to just get through an hour a day. It wasn't day by day, it was hour by hour. And I had gotten to the point where I had pretty much accepted that the only way out was either he was going to end up dying or I was going to die. And that was what it was for me. And it was terrifying. I was like, oh, my luck, as horrible as it sounds, he's going to live to be 80 years old and I'm going to be stuck forever. So when it kind of finally hit me and came time to just be like, I have to get out, I started planning and I was preparing myself, and I did it slowly. I started, first with inside myself mentally, like taking away some of his power, making it so that like we no longer all went to the store or the gas station or something like that all together. And it was like, no, I'm going to go by myself, and slowly taking things away and standing up for myself more. And I remember one time I was in therapy at this point and I was still with him and I was slowly doing this. And he just looks at me and he said, I don't love you like this. And in my head, I was like, thank God, because it's working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting myself back. It's working. I'm slowly doing this. And then I started working at FedEx again. And I was telling everybody that I talked to what was going on at home, because I knew the more people that I told, the more people would be there to hold me accountable. And it was, I'm going to look like a fool if I don't leave. So I would tell everybody. I'm not saying that everybody should do that, but for me, that's what worked. And then eventually I called the employee assistance line, and they put me in contact with the domestic abuse line, who put me in contact with the network. And I got the restraining order started over the phone. And then the following day after that, I was escaping and taking my kids and living at the safe house for the next 2 months.
So did he try to find you?
Oh, yeah. So when I first left, the first thing I did was block his number from my cell phone, because I knew he was going to try. The only person that knew that I was going even to a safe house, which obviously I'm not telling anybody where it's at or anything like that, but just so they know I'm okay, was really my family and his mom.
Did they know it was this bad? Did your family know?
No. So my family actually did point it out to me. They would tell me that he was manipulative. My mom actually called him the master manipulator on a few times. So they saw it. Then he would turn around and do what he did, and I would push my family away. And I'd be like, no, this is the father of my children. This is my husband. And he would be like, you're going to leave me and because your family's saying things, and basically just little things like that would turn me away from them. So then I wouldn't listen to them. I didn't talk to my family really for, I'd say, probably about 5 years.
Wow.
There was very little communication between us. So he definitely isolated me from my family. And when I did talk to them, it'd be like, oh, how are you? Oh, everything's great. And it'd be over text message. And if I did talk to them, then I would, if it was a long phone call, I'd get yelled at. Why are you talking to your family? And it would turn into things like that.
So when you finally went to court, how did that go about? Did you have to see him in court?
I did have to see him in court, which was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I bet.
The first time that I went for the court date, there was some paperwork mixed up. And then when I walked in, he was already there. I saw him from down the hall, and I just didn't even look at him. I walked right past him. And I think because I had my friend there with me, he didn't try to approach me.
Mm-hmm.
But that was definitely scary. I have an issue with the way that restraining orders are done, because if you're requesting a restraining order, you don't want to see the person.
Yeah, right.
So that was not fun. But
So let me ask you this, Meghan, about restraining orders or protective orders. Are they effective? Are they a deterrent?
I mean, they are effective. I think they provide survivors with protection, with actual enforceable protection. And it provides the court with enforceable ways to hold the abuser accountable, right? And, everybody's situation is different. So it's not that in every situation it makes sense for you to go and file for a protective or restraining order. You really do have to work with the advocate on your safety plan and what your plan is. As you heard Jenna say, she did a little at a time.
Yeah, you sure did.
So we're not suggesting that everybody's situation is the same, but they certainly work. They're effective. I mean, look, obviously there's instances where people have restraining orders and they're violated. And sometimes, it doesn't end well. But we do work very closely with the courts to ensure that survivors are getting the protections that they need. And Karen can probably speak to, since she does have a civil, criminal, and family court advocate on staff, she can probably speak to what they're able to do day to day.
And Karen, as a trooper, did you see people violate protective orders or restraining orders a lot?
Very often they are violated. And what Meghan made the most important thing about an order of protection is that it's enforceable. We often tell our victims, our survivors, that we truly need to ensure that safety planning goes hand in hand with that. It is a piece of paper. It's not a barrier that's going to, keep the subject away from them. So, a person could go into a family court and apply for a restraining order on their own. But I strongly encourage that they do so with an advocate so that we can weigh out whether or not it's appropriate for their particular circumstances, and also design a safety plan around that so that not only is it enforceable, but empowers that survivor to take steps to, keep themselves safe on top of the order.
So if you get a restraining order and you have to go to court together, how does that work to help the victim or survivor?
It's a good question.
I mean, how terrifying. I feel so bad for you, Jenna, that you had to face him in court. Like, that's the last person you want to see.
I will say that I felt like it was a huge step in taking my power back.
Okay, that's great.
Because I do know that, he was looking at me, and how you feel somebody's eyes on you. And just walking by and not giving him the time of day, it felt really good. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't terrifying.
Right. And I will say with the pandemic, the courts did work with us to be able to provide virtual hearings. And that's something that we continue to work with them and advocate that those should stay. Because,
that's great. That's a great way to do it.
Because they were much more, I think victims found them to be easier in terms of not necessarily having to stand in the same room with the abuser. So we've worked really closely with the courts to ensure that that's still an option moving forward, even outside of the pandemic.
Are police getting enough training, do you think?
So I want to say from 2012 to now, there has been a huge evolving process of training with domestic violence. I was actually a training instructor at the academy in 2012 when a bill was passed that basically looked at, CCADV looked at over 140 intimate partner homicides in the state of Connecticut. And they learned that each police department sort of handled DV slightly different. So what they did is they passed some legislation to say that there needs to be a statewide model policy for all police departments. It's legislatively, statutorily mandated that police officers, when they get their recertification, need 2 hours of domestic violence training within a 3-year window. They recertify every 3 years. Sometimes that's not enough because the laws can change within that 3 years. So within each department, there's training officers that are responsible for keeping them up to date. And I know for the state police, they do an in-service every year. So they're getting trained yearly.
It's interesting, the fact that you're talking about legislation like Jennifer's Law for Jennifer Dulos. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it was part of a larger domestic violence bill last session that included expanding the language for domestic violence to include a lot of the things that Jennifer referenced. So establish pattern and behavior of psychological, emotional, financial abuse in order for individuals to go and seek a restraining order. So it wasn't that the court hadn't seen these behaviors before, but they had no way to enforce it. But now they do. So individuals as of October 1st can go, and actually Karen, I think, the network has successfully worked on a couple of coercive control restraining orders already. So they can go and seek that protection. And it is enforceable, and it's enforceable by the police and the court. And not only did that bill expand that, but it also provided legal aid. So individuals that do qualify in several cities across the state are able to obtain free legal representation in order to go in and apply for the restraining order as well.
It's great that language changed, and it's surprising that it took this long.
I was going to say, for anyone that's listening out there are two in the 18 agencies across the state, of which the network is one. There are two different types of advocates that work in the court system. One is the civil legal advocate, and the other is the family violence victims advocate that works in the criminal court. So if someone is trying to navigate that family court process, not just restraining orders, but custody, things of that nature, anything that you would hear, you can reach out to that advocate, and that advocate can actually walk you through filing that paperwork. You don't have to do it alone. And then on top of it, help you with the safety planning, like I spoke to earlier. When you're talking about a family, there are so many different tentacles to where someone might need help, accessing social services, getting help for their kids, getting into therapy or getting into a group setting. It's really vital that they reach out to that advocate for help. You don't have to do it alone.
That's amazing that the services that are available from the network, and I know from CCADV. How has COVID affected domestic violence? Has it increased since COVID started?
Oh, yeah. I think, and Karen can speak to this, but I think we've seen an increase statewide. So I think our shelter is usually running over capacity about 125%. At the height of COVID, it was 180%. And so we've been around 140 or so. It's exacerbated the issue of isolation. So abusers have been able to use that to their advantage in a way that they maybe necessarily weren't, right? Because there's not a lot of places to go. You're scared of getting COVID. That's often used against victims as well now. Yeah, we've seen an increase in the amount of calls for help, but also the complexity, as you could hear in Jenna's story, that's increased. So there's a lot of complexity to these cases and in people's lives. And so we have been working with people more and more for longer periods of time, and that's fine with us. Anybody can always come back whenever they need help and services. But it's put a strain on, staff across the state. And I'm always just amazed by the resilience of staff. I think they've gone way above and beyond over the last 2 years now. And I think it's really sort of changed the way we think about, or I hope it's changed the way we think about domestic violence, that it's not just something we talk about in October, and that it's not something we can't talk about all the time, but we can really talk about it because it's just as COVID is a public health crisis, this is also a public health crisis.
What are some of the warning signs that people can actually look for if you're worried that someone might be in that kind of relationship?
Power and control. They can call us and we can give them options. And then just like we would in our advocacy, we lay out the options and then say, what are you ready to do? What would you like to do? And we can help friends and family, if you will, with giving them some of those options, because a lot of people aren't aware of what's available out there.
Yeah, and I think really, Meghan, you and Karen doing all that you do for people like Jenna, getting her to the other side. It's got to be so satisfying to see the success that Jenna has made of her life when 5 years ago, she probably didn't even think that was possible.
Honestly, I look back 1 year ago from today and I still wasn't out. And I look back and I don't even recognize who I was. Like, I've had so much growth and so much help from everybody around me. And I just want everybody to know that there is help out there, but it's not like it's going to just come knock on your door. You have to look for it and you have to take the steps yourself. And as hard as it is, like one step at a time, even if that first step is just like looking around and questioning, is this healthy? Is this normal? Is this what I should be going through? Once you recognize it and you see it, that's for me personally when the change started. And I was like, started listening to my gut and was like, this isn't okay. This is not right for me. This is not right for my kids. And really, that's where it all starts.
And I think when you verbalize that to your friends and you, like you said, it was going to make you hold yourself accountable. You start talking about it to other people. That's when you know you want to get away.
And I know people thought that I was crazy. I know people thought I was crazy for sharing personal information with, people that I had just met, but it was my way of doing it. And it worked for me.
Well, you have a very powerful story, that's for sure. And Karen, I'm sure that makes you feel, that you're doing your job well.
It makes me realize that, and I can't wait for staff to hear it as well. It's been a tough couple of years being essential, and there was no remote work in what we do for the most part. So hearing Jenna's story kind of, fills you back up and gives you the strength to keep going and knowing that you're making a difference. So thank you so much, Jenna, for speaking so highly of the shelter staff. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy that
when I left, I like to write. I write my feelings, and it's a big therapy thing for me. But when I ended up moving out of the safe house, I wrote like a 2 or so page letter, like just thanking them for everything, because they were my support and they still are. So you guys are amazing.
If someone listening has a friend or a family member in a controlling relationship like you did, Jenna, what would you tell them to do?
Don't push. The biggest thing is that people that are in that situation, they do feel the shame. They feel the guilt. They know in the back of their mind that it's not okay, but they're afraid to ask for help. So if they do start talking, listen, be there for them, do your own research. And so when you have the opportunity, present them with the options that you found, because chances are they're not able to do that research themselves. And just be a friend. And like I said, just listen to them and be there for them. And when they're ready, help them in any way that they need.
So I just wanted to bring things back to Connecticut paid leave, Jenna. So do you think that Connecticut paid leave could have helped you during your time of struggle? And let me just remind you of what it was. So it gives 12 days of income replacement for criminal or civil court hearings. And if you need to move, it also helps you for using help from a victim service organization, or if you have to seek medical or psychological help. That's what Connecticut paid leave does for victims of family violence. Do you think that would have helped you?
I do. So when I left, I was out of work for 2 months. So really anything would have helped at that time.
So Karen, 54 people have already applied to these benefits.
That's fantastic. An arrest, especially in a domestic violence situation, that can be very disruptive to someone's life. The victim may want to go to court and advocate, for themselves with a victim's advocate as to what's going to work best for their family post the arrest. And even if an arrest hasn't been made, victims of abuse may need to seek out you said psychological, but medical attention.
Yeah.
DCF may sometimes get involved in some of these cases, and that sometimes becomes requirements where they have to get the children into certain programs as a result of what, especially if there's an arrest, if the children are home and witness this often, DCF sometimes gets involved. And it requires a mom to miss work.
Yeah, you're right.
To put all the pieces back together.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that at least this program is sort of another layer of protection for them.
It's huge. It's also, sometimes when you're afraid to make a change, anything can become a barrier to avoid it. It just takes one of those barriers to serve us away. So we're so grateful that it's come into existence. And I can't tell you, I'm so happy that so many people have already taken advantage of it.
Yeah, I wish there weren't so many people who needed it. I really hope at some juncture, that will change, but we are here for them if they need it, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Well, Jenna, you're a very brave person. That's all I can say. And you're an inspiration to a lot of people.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all for being here on this podcast. It's a very important podcast. CCADV Executive Director Meghan Scanlon, thank you for all your wisdom.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for advocating for the women and the men who need it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege to be able to do that. And it's people like Jenna that make it worth doing. So I feel very lucky to be in this position.
You do amazing work. And Network Executive Director Karen Foley O'Connor, thank you so much for sharing what you have seen as a former state trooper and what needs to be done. You are really making change. I mean, I think it's really amazing to see Jenna here and healthy and doing what she has to do for her kids. And Karen, it's a lot because of you.
Thank you so much for doing this podcast and giving me the opportunity to talk about the services that are there, that knowledge is power. So giving the opportunity for people to know that there is free and confidential help out there. It's my pleasure to be here.
If someone listening right now needs help or just someone to talk to, I just want to get these out here. ConnecticutSafeConnect.org, or you could call or text 888-774-2900. And wherever you are in the state, it will get you the help you need. And advocates are available 24/7. And Connecticut Paid Leave can help you with family violence. You can find out more by going to our website at ctpaidleave.org. Thank you all so much for joining me. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.